I am the Executive Director of Policy and Regulatory Alignment in the Policy Management Office. We are a relatively new shop. Christine, I'm going to need your help with this. Technology's beyond me. We started in 2012, set up in September, and our first focus was on getting the Alberta Energy Regulator stood up in June of 2013 when the ERCB was dissolved, and as you know, AER took on the responsibilities of the former ERCB at that point. And the Policy Management Office provided a fair bit of advice and recommendations throughout the process of developing regulations and rules under the Responsible Energy Development Act. That occurred in 3 phases. First was to roll the public lands work and the geophysical work under the umbrella of the regulator for upstream oil and gas, oil sands and coal activities. And the third phase involved moving the APIA Water Act responsibility for those activities under the bailiwick of the AER. So that brought us over the course of a year, from June of 13 to March of 2014, full life cycle regulator for the upstream oil and gas, oil sands and coal sectors. And our work after that point has now shifted to getting Policy Management Office stood up as an interface between the Alberta Energy Regulator and our policymakers in government. So a lot of our work on a day-to-day basis, as alluded to in Gerald's bio there, is herding the cats and making sure that all the moving parts are fitting together. A lot of advice is given by some of our subject matter experts in the office, like Gerald, who's lived both sides of the ERCB equation as well as the environment side of things. And that ability to provide that real-time, as I call it, integration advice has been pretty critical to the transition period here. So a little bit of rep history. I'm not sure the background of a lot of you folks on this stuff. It started in 2010. Of course, the driver at that point was Alberta's competitiveness and making sure that we had the best possible regulatory system for our leading industries, upstream oil and gas, oil sands and coal. The Regulatory Enhancement Task Force had 6 recommendations, the first of which was to create a Policy Management Office to provide that integration and coordination role across government. The Natural Resource and Environmental Management file is managed by the Department of Energy, ESRD, Aboriginal Relations, as well as the Alberta Energy Regulator now, and the Alberta Environmental Monitoring Evaluation and Reporting Agency. And so those 5 organizations operating independently, but of course in cooperation with each other to deliver a pretty important work. As our new Premier has said, if you're in the agriculture, oil and gas and forestry business, you're also in the environment business. And so that's been a bit of a refresher for us with the Regulatory Enhancement Project objectives. Premier has made it a priority for us to deliver the remaining 3 recommendations under the Regulatory Enhancement Project in short order here. So you'll see on this slide a little bit of a status update. 3 of the 6 recommendations are delivered, and we're in that phase now of transitioning to more operational and transformational kind of work. To date, what you should see on the landscape and among the various players in government and in the public sector, much greater focus on integration efforts. A single regulator, so that one window, full life cycle delivery from mineral exploration to closure, reclamation and certification of the facilities. Much greater transparency in the system. We moved from an ERCB model where you had the Directive 56 model with the concentric circles for the directly affected folks, and now you've got public notice of all applications under the energy statutes and the environmental statutes. Policies now are publicly available. I'll get to that in a later slide, as they relate to upstream oil and gas, oil sands, and coal activities. So everything from provincial statutes, regulations, on down through more operational policy guidelines and directives, that type of thing. So for us, as I mentioned, our main functions are to provide that interface between the government and the AER. That includes talking to folks like you, sessions like this, also to get feedback on how things are going from the policy development side of things, as well as the regulatory side, and elevating to the policymakers, our masters back in government, any issues that might be present on the landscape, and also flagging similar issues that are identified by the regulator from an operational standpoint, policy gaps and support that they might need. Policy integration, I would say, takes up about a third of our time back at the office, just coordinating and making sure that the time and space is created among all the different players to make sure that we've got policies that take into account those triple bottom line economic, social, environmental impacts. So this is goes to that transparency piece that I think might be of interest to a lot of you folks who are doing the consulting work and helping some of the approval holders with getting their certification on the landscape. It's the website's there, www.areps.ca. That's a policy portal which government rolled out in 2013, principally to help the regulator understand the policies of government as it relates to the different files under the energy statutes, as well as public lands, the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act, Water Act, and the geophysical policies. And so that pie chart there gives you an indication of current state as of last week of the proportion of policies related to upstream oil and gas, oil sands, and coal. You'll see a pretty big, about 3/4 there on the environment and public land side of things, and the remaining quarter made up of the energy policies and the AER policies, as well as the Aboriginal Relations First Nations consultation policy for natural resource development. Another big part of our work, which you'll may see more of over the course of 2015, is an engagement framework, and this is the third of 6 recommendations under the Regulatory Enhancement Task Force, and that was to develop a coordinated approach to stakeholder engagement. As we all know, things are changing a lot faster. Our change cycle seems to be not really event-driven, but more continuous these days, and stakeholder expectations, both externally and internally, are sort of taking on that same sort of tone, and the expectation of real-time response and feedback in government as well as regulators is growing. And so a key deliverable for Policy Management Office, and we're targeting this year for completing that, is to complete a framework that will apply across the 5 main organizations on the natural resources development and environmental leadership file, that will help stakeholders both internally and externally know where, when, and how their input can be input into the system, both on the policy development side as well as the regulatory side. So more to come on that one. Some of the key work you'll see over the next year and a bit from the Policy Management Office, as I said, the engagement framework. Recommendation 5 of the Regulatory Enhancement Project was to develop a coordinated performance measurement framework for the system, so that in real time stakeholders internally and externally could see how the system's performing, and also flag for the system players where they need to focus their attention. The regulator now being live for a year and a half, coming up to 2 years, we've tested out a few processes and different models for internal policy integration among the 5 key players. We're in the process now of reviewing those processes we've had over the last couple of years and finalizing them and improving them so that we've got a better I guess, a better access to real-time information so that our decision makers, both on the policy development side as well as regulatory decision makers, have the context and the information they need to make the best decisions possible. Again, the www.areps.ca rollout will come over the course of this year. We had a soft release when the regulator went live in 2013, so we could work out a few of the bugs in a safe place. Always some interesting challenges with the technical side of things, but the system's performing quite well now, and so I think we're ready to kind of do the great reveal on that. You can go to it now. It's live and active, and it's a great source. There's a Google-style search tool there, as well as an advanced search tool, which allows you, if you kind of know what you're looking for, you can search by sector, by media type, by policy type. So those of you that are familiar with a number of the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act guidelines and directives, as well as the AER directives, you can find those through that site. Importantly, it's a portal, so it's not housing or duplicating where the policies live. The policies actually still stay housed in the home organizations, and AREPS just accesses them just like any other search engine. The other key piece of work which will come once we roll out a number of these initiatives will be to assess what next. As many of you know, in the special areas as well as parks and protected areas, we don't yet have a single regulator for the sector. There's also been in past iterations of the Regulatory Enhancement Project materials suggestion that we need to look at the midstream, downstream activities as well. So we still need to scope that out, and more work to come on that. And that's sort of in the gone but not forgotten file that you need to be aware of.